The word worthless echoed through the marble halls of the family court like a gunshot. At 44, sitting in the defendant's chair while my husband of 20 years tried to strip me of everything I'd helped build, I felt that word settle into my bones like poison. Your Honor, Richard's lawyer continued, his voice dripping with practiced disdain. Mrs. Catherine Bennett has contributed nothing of monetary value to this marriage. She has no career, no income, no assets of her own. She is, by any reasonable financial measure, worthless to this partnership. I gripped the edge of the wooden table until my knuckles went white, fighting the urge to stand up and scream. 20 years of marriage reduced to a balance sheet. 2 decades of sacrifice, support, and selfless love dismissed as worthless because it couldn't be quantified in dollars and cents. Richard sat beside his attorney with the same cold expression he'd worn when he told me about his affair, when he announced he was leaving, when he served me with divorce papers that painted me as a parasite who'd lived off his success. The man I'd loved since college. The man I'd supported through law school while working 2 jobs. The man whose career I'd prioritized over my own dreams, now watched silently as his lawyers systematically destroyed my character. But what Richard and his high-powered attorney didn't know was that our 17-year-old daughter Emma was sitting in the gallery behind me, listening to every word. And Emma had something to say about her worthless mother. The months leading up to this courtroom humiliation had been a masterclass in how quickly a life can unravel. Richard's affair with his young paralegal had been going on for over a year before I discovered it. But the signs had been there long before that: the late nights, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the way he'd stopped seeing me as a partner and started treating me like hired help. When I confronted him with the evidence I'd found on his laptop, he didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at me with something approaching pity and said, "Catherine, we've grown apart. You've become comfortable, stagnant. I need someone who challenges me, who brings something to the table." The irony was devastating. I'd spent 20 years making sure Richard never had to worry about anything that might distract him from his career. I'd managed our household, raised our daughter, maintained our social connections, supported his ambitions at the expense of my own. I'd turned down job opportunities, delayed my own education, sacrificed my independence to be the perfect wife and mother. And now that very sacrifice was being used as evidence of my worthlessness. The divorce proceedings had been brutal from the start. Richard's lawyer, a shark named Bradley Morrison who specialized in high-net-worth divorces, had painted me as a gold digger who'd trapped a promising young law student and then lived off his success for 2 decades. Never mind that I'd worked full-time to put Richard through law school. Never mind that I'd been the one to encourage him to start his own practice, using my inheritance from my grandmother as seed money. In Morrison's narrative, I was a parasite, a woman who'd contributed nothing to the marriage except the burden of her existence. He'd systematically devalued every sacrifice I'd made, every contribution I'd offered, every way I'd supported Richard's rise to success. "Mrs. Bennett," Morrison had said during my deposition, his voice dripping with condescension, "can you point to any tangible assets you've brought to this marriage? Any income you've generated? Any measurable contribution to the family's financial success?" I'd sat there, speechless, watching 20 years of love and devotion be reduced to a series of zeros on a financial statement. The courtroom was packed with observers, other lawyers, court reporters, law students studying family law. Divorce proceedings involving successful attorneys often drew an audience, and Richard's case had generated interest because of his prominence in the legal community. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, my life dissected for public consumption. Judge Patricia Hernandez presided over the proceedings with the weary efficiency of someone who'd seen too many marriages destroyed by greed and ego. She'd been listening to Morrison's character assassination for over an hour, her expression carefully neutral as he painted me as a burden Richard had carried for 2 decades. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Morrison continued, pacing in front of the bench like a predator circling wounded prey, "Mrs. Bennett's lack of employment history demonstrates a fundamental unwillingness to contribute to society. While my client built a successful law practice, employed dozens of people, and contributed significantly to the community. Mrs. Bennet chose the path of leisure and dependency. My own lawyer, a kind but overworked public defender named Sarah Chan, had done her best to prepare me for this moment. But nothing could have prepared me for the systematic destruction of my character, the way my choices were being twisted into evidence of moral failure. "She has no marketable skills," Morrison declared, his voice rising with theatrical indignation. "No work experience beyond a few part-time jobs in her early 20s. No education beyond a bachelor's degree she obtained before marriage. She is, in every measurable sense, worthless as an economic partner." That word again, worthless. It hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning everything it touched. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on me, judging me, weighing Morrison's words against the woman they saw before them. But then I heard something that made my heart stop, a sharp intake of breath from the gallery behind me. I turned slightly and saw Emma, her face flushed with anger, her hands clenched into fists. My daughter had been listening to this character assassination of her mother, and I could see she'd reached her breaking point. "Emma, no," I whispered, sensing what was coming. But it was too late. Watching my daughter's face transform with rage and indignation, I felt a war raging inside my chest. Part of me wanted to protect her from this ugliness, to shield her from seeing her mother torn apart in public. Emma was only 17, still young enough to believe in fairness and justice, still innocent enough to be shocked by the cruelty adults could inflict on each other. But another part of me, the part that had been silent for too long, was grateful that someone in that courtroom saw the truth. For months, I'd been questioning my own worth, wondering if Richard and his lawyer were right, if I really had been nothing more than a burden, a woman who'd taken without giving. The systematic destruction of my character had worked its way into my psyche like a slow poison. When you hear something often enough from people who seem to have authority and expertise, you start to believe it. I'd begun to see myself through their eyes as a woman who'd wasted her potential, who'd chosen the easy path of dependency over the harder road of independence. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to Morrison catalog my failures and shortcomings, I felt every year of my 44 years weighing on my shoulders. Every choice I'd made, every sacrifice I'd offered, every dream I'd deferred seemed suddenly foolish and naive. Maybe I was worthless. Maybe I had wasted my life. But then I looked at Emma, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd forgotten existed: recognition. Not of the woman Morrison was describing, but of the mother she'd known for 17 years. The woman who'd been there for every scraped knee and broken heart, every triumph and disappointment, every moment that mattered in her young life. Emma knew who I really was. She'd seen my worth every day, in ways that couldn't be measured on a balance sheet or quantified in a legal brief. And she wasn't going to sit quietly while someone tried to erase that truth. The moment stretched between us like a bridge, connecting the woman I'd been with the woman I was becoming. Emma stood up in the gallery with the sudden force of a thunderclap, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that cut through Morrison's monologue like a knife. The entire courtroom turned to look at this teenager who'd just disrupted formal legal proceedings. "Excuse me," Judge Hernandez said, her voice carrying the authority of someone unaccustomed to interruptions. "Young lady, you cannot speak during these proceedings. Please sit down." But Emma wasn't backing down. At 17, she had the fearless conviction that comes with youth and righteous anger. "Your Honor, I'm sorry, but I can't sit here and listen to this anymore." Morrison looked apoplectic. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The gallery must maintain order. I know who that woman is," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger despite the tears streaming down her face. "And what he's saying about her is a lie." Richard had gone pale, perhaps realizing for the first time that his daughter had been listening to every word of his lawyer's character assassination. He'd probably expected Emma to side with him, to understand that divorce was sometimes necessary, that people grew apart. But he hadn't expected her to witness the systematic destruction of her mother's worth. "Emma, please," he said, half rising from his chair. "This isn't the place." "No, Dad." Emma's voice cracked with emotion. "This is exactly the place. Because someone needs to tell the truth about Mom. Judge Hernandez looked torn between maintaining courtroom decorum and allowing this young woman to speak. Family court judges saw the collateral damage of divorce, everyday children caught in the crossfire, families torn apart by legal warfare. But there was something in Emma's voice that gave her pause. "Your Honor," my lawyer Sarah Chen stood up, sensing an opportunity. "Perhaps we could allow the minor child to make a brief statement? She is, after all, a product of this marriage and has first-hand knowledge of both parties." Morrison objected immediately. "This is completely inappropriate. The child has no legal standing, she has moral standing," Emma interrupted, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "And she has eyes. And she's been watching her mother be called worthless by people who don't know the first thing about worth." The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Judge Hernandez made her decision. "I'll allow it." Briefly, Emma walked to the front of the courtroom with the determined stride of someone who'd found her purpose. She didn't ask permission to approach the bench, didn't wait for formal invitation. She simply positioned herself where everyone could see her and began to speak with a clarity that belied her 17 years. "My name is Emma Bennett," she said, her voice steady despite the tears still flowing down her cheeks. "And that woman you just called worthless is my mother." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even Morrison seemed stunned into speechlessness by this unexpected turn of events. "You want to know about Worth?" Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Let me tell you about Worth. When I was 8 and had pneumonia, my mom slept in a hospital chair for 6 nights straight because she refused to leave my side. When Dad was working 18-hour days building his practice, Mom was the one who helped me with homework, drove me to soccer practice, and made sure I knew I was loved." She turned to look directly at Morrison, her young face fierce with indignation. "You say she has no marketable skills? She managed a household budget that allowed my father to take financial risks with his business. She organized charity events that brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars for local nonprofits. She tutored neighborhood kids for free because their parents couldn't afford help." Richard was staring at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, his face a mixture of shock and something that might have been shame. "You say she's worthless because she doesn't have a career." Emma's voice rose with passion. "She gave up her career so my father could have his. She turned down job offers, delayed her own dreams, sacrificed her independence so he could chase his ambitions without worrying about anything else." Emma pulled out her phone, scrolling quickly through photos. "You want to see Worthless? Here's my mom at AM helping me finish a science project I'd procrastinated on. Here she's chaperoning my school dance when she had the flu. Here she's teaching me to drive in an empty parking lot every Sunday for 3 months." The photos passed by on her phone screen like a slideshow of devotion, moments of ordinary love that suddenly seemed extraordinary in this sterile courtroom setting. "My mom worked 2 jobs to put my father through law school," Emma continued, her voice now ringing with authority. "She used her grandmother's inheritance to help him start his practice. She was his first employee, his unpaid secretary, his emotional support through every challenge he faced." She turned to face her father directly, her voice breaking with hurt and disappointment. "And now you sit there and let your lawyer call her worthless? The woman who made your success possible." Emma looked back at the judge, then at the packed courtroom. "You want to know what worthless looks like? Worthless is a man who throws away 20 years of love and sacrifice for a younger woman. Worthless is someone who tries to erase the contributions of the person who made their success possible." Her voice cracked as she delivered her final words. "My mother isn't worthless. She's my hero. And if you can't see that, then you're the ones who don't understand worth." The silence that followed was deafening. The impact of Emma's words was immediate and profound. Judge Hernandez, who had maintained professional composure throughout the proceedings, was visibly moved. Several people in the gallery were wiping away tears, and even the court reporter had stopped typing to listen. Morrison, for the first time since the proceedings began, seemed at a loss for words. His carefully constructed narrative about my worthlessness had been dismantled by a 17-year-old girl who'd simply told the truth about love, sacrifice, and what really matters in a family. Richard sat in stunned silence, perhaps finally seeing the true cost of his choices. The The daughter he'd expected to understand his need for a fresh start had instead become my most powerful advocate, defending not just my worth but the value of everything I'd given to our family. Judge Hernandez called for a recess, but the damage to Morrison's case was already done. Emma's testimony had reframed the entire narrative, transforming me from a parasitic dependent into a woman who'd made strategic sacrifices for her family's benefit. When proceedings resumed, the tone had shifted dramatically. My contributions to the marriage were no longer dismissed as worthless but recognized as valuable, if uncompensated, labor. The inheritance I'd contributed, the career opportunities I'd foregone, the unpaid work I'd performed, all of it suddenly mattered in ways Morrison's financial calculations had failed to capture. The final settlement reflected this new understanding. I received not just alimony but recognition of my contributions to Richard's success, acknowledgement that my sacrifices had enabled his achievements. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the moment Emma took my hand as we left the courthouse and said, "I'm proud of you, Mom. I'm proud of everything you've done for our family." That night, I realized that worth isn't measured in paychecks or career titles. It's measured in the lives you touch, the love you give, the sacrifices you make for others. And sometimes, when the world tries to convince you that you're worthless, it takes someone who truly knows you to remind everyone, including yourself, of your immeasurable value. My daughter had seen my worth when I'd forgotten it myself. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever been made to feel worthless because your contributions couldn't be measured in dollars and cents, remember this: your value as a human being transcends any balance sheet. The love you give, the sacrifices you make, the lives you touch, these have worth beyond measure. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their own immeasurable value today. Subscribe for more stories about women who discover their worth through the eyes of those who truly see them. Because every woman who has loved selflessly, sacrificed willingly, and given generously deserves to know that she is not worthless, she is priceless. Sometimes the most powerful moment in our lives is when someone we love refuses to let the world diminish our worth.